Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, MTG. For today's video, no face cam, but I do have a very cool video for you guys. So I was going through all of the different decks that are going to get some sort of a significant upgrade from Modern Horizons for the modern format, and it turns out that there are actually quite a few decks that are getting these significant upgrades. So the videos that I'm going to be making for today's Sunday, so Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Sunday, we're going to be going over 5 decks, which Sunday is today. We're going over 5 modern decks that are seeing a huge improvement from Modern Horizons. On Monday, we're going to look at yet another 5 decks that are seeing a huge improvement from Modern Horizons. And then on Tuesday, we're going to talk about the 5 biggest losers from Modern Horizons and some of the decks that were actually hurt by the printing of Modern Horizons. So be on the lookout for those videos to come here into your sub boxes in the very near future. Of course, all of my videos here on the channel are sponsored by CardSphere, so huge shout out to CardSphere, and thank you so much for the support on the channel. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into this. So the first deck that we're going to talk about is obviously going to be the Slivers. So Slivers gets a huge upgrade in this set. Having Slivers be one of the main themes means that, of course, people are going to be purchasing more Slivers, more people are going to be sleeving up Slivers, and the big Slivers that I see making a difference in Modern are going to start out with the multicolored red-white Cloud Shredder Sliver. For 2 mana, a red and a white, Sliver 1/1. Sliver creatures you control have flying and haste. When we take a look at this Slivers deck, you can see most of these slivers, if not all of these slivers, have one keyword on them. So Gale Rider Sliver, flying. Sidewinder Sliver, flanking. Striking Sliver, first strike, and that goes all the way down where you can see that they have only one effect or one keyword on them, and that's true all the way down until we reach the Sedge Sliver, which has this creature gets +1/+1 as long as you control a swamp, and also the regeneration on it as well. But aside from that, all of these other slivers have just one keyword on them. So this makes it the first sliver for the modern deck that has 2 keywords on it that'll be very playable. Flying and haste are great keywords. The haste is not something that the deck currently plays, but is something that could be totally relevant in the creature mirrors, and having flying again is just really good. You can see if we go back here, 4 Gale Rider Slivers in the main already, so they are playing these effects to give the flying, so we might see even more flying slivers now between the Gale Rider Sliver and this brand new sliver from Modern Horizons in the Cloud Shredder Sliver. And the other sliver that I think is going to make a bit of a difference for the Slivers deck is right here, the Spiteful Sliver. 3 mana 2/2. Sliver creatures you control have, whenever this creature is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target player or planeswalker. Even if this card just ends up being a sideboard card and not actually a main deck card, I could still see the Spiteful Sliver making a huge difference in the creature matchups. So boarded in against humans, things where you're going to be in combat a lot against opposing creatures, and against the decks that have damage-based removal. So when we talk about things like Izzet Phoenix that play Lightning Bolt and Lava Axe, if they Lava Axe one of your slivers while you have a Spiteful Sliver out, they're taking 5 damage just to kill off one of your slivers, which is crazy considering you're a creature deck and most likely just going to kill them the next turn since they're willing to take 5 whole damage. Of course, the exception would be something like Death Shadow or something like that, where they're trying to deal damage to themselves. But aside from that, the Spiteful Sliver is going to be great against those damage-based removal spells. Mainly out of red, you don't really see them too much out of any other color. Fatal Push doesn't do damage, just kind of destroys. Exile from Path to Exile, so you're really only going to see it from the red-based removal spells, but there are a lot of decks playing, again, Lightning Bolt and these other red-based removal spells. Occasionally you'll see like a white removal spell that does it, like Sunlance or something like that, but those are very uncommon. So really just against the red-based removal decks, you'll want to bring in your Spiteful Slivers, but again, it's going to be a fantastic, fantastic card in those matchups. The next deck we're going to take a look at here is Devoted Company. So this is a creature-based combo deck where you're trying to assemble Devoted Druid plus Vizier of Remedies. So Vizier of Remedies says if one or more -1/-1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many -1/-1 counters -1 are put on it instead. And then we have Devoted Druid, which taps for a green and then has put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it. So with the Devoted Druid and the Vizier of Remedies in play together, you end up with infinite green mana, which allows you to use a Duskwatch Recruiter an infinite number of times to then find a Walking Ballista that you can cast for an infinitely large amount, and then just dome out your opponent for infinite or whatever number you end up naming when you cast the Walking Ballista. The big reasons that these end up getting a huge upgrade is going to be from some actually non-creature spells, despite it being a creature-based combo deck. So we have Eladamri's Call here, 2-mana instant, search your library for a creature card, reveal that card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So again, since you're a creature-based combo deck, Eladamri's Call allows you to find whatever card you want to. It also gives you a little bit of play at instant speed as well, which is nice. If we go back and look at these Devoted Druid lists, right now they're playing a lot of Court of Callings and Collected Companies, but sometimes you'll occasionally see something like an Eldritch Evolution in there as well. I highly doubt that you'll ever see Eldritch Evolution in these kind of decks again now that Eladamri's Call is a thing, and I think that you'll most likely be seeing some number of Eladamri's Call within these lists, maybe cut down on one Court of Calling, or maybe even just cut out the Collected Companies altogether. That could be a thing, because the Collected Companies are really there for like the value engine, like Knight of the Reliquary, Tireless Tracker, and then sometimes you just like accidentally yourself into the combo, or you end up finding something like a Noble Hierarch and like a Knight of the Reliquary, something like that. But you really want to, you can really focus this deck much more on the combo once you have Eladamri's Call. And another thing that we have access to is going to be a black card for the deck. You can see, hold on, we'll go back to it right now. You can see that right now this version is just green-white. The way that this wins is through the Walking Ballista, but there are versions that also run the Abzan shell. If we can find one of those, white-green Devoted Company. These are all, yeah, none of these are really Abzan. This one shows Abzan, but really isn't. I guess just isn't playing it despite it showing up. But what ends up happening if you're the Abzan version is you'll get access to Viscera Seer, which again is another card that you can use as a combo piece. You end up doing infinite damage if you have a Murderous Redcap in play with your Viscera Seer and your Vizier of Remedies, and you end up gaining infinite life if you have a Vizier of Remedies, a Viscera Seer, and a Kitchen Finks together. Then you can gain infinite life or do infinite damage depending on which of those combos you have put together. You do have to extend into black again, so you are playing a 3-color deck at this point. You don't really care too much. You have Birds of Paradise and you have the mana fixing for it. But if you were to do that, you would get access then to Unearth. For 1 black mana, you get a sorcery. Return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. When we look back at all of those creatures that I said were needed for the combo, we look back at Vizier of Remedies, 2 converted mana cost, Duskwatch Recruiter, 2 converted mana cost, Devoted Druid, 2 converted mana cost. So you can find all of those with Unearth and just bring them back to the battlefield. You can also find, for the Abzan version, you'd be able to find the Kitchen Finks, you'd be able to find the Viscera Seer. The only thing that you wouldn't be able to bring back from the graveyard would be the Murderous Redcap, because that is CMC 4. But when you think about all of the potential cards that you could bring back with the Unearth, it just makes so much sense in this deck to, especially for the Abzan versions where you're already playing black mana in there. It just really adds a bunch of resiliency and redundancy to your deck, which makes it much, much better, especially in the modern format. And so I think that these creature decks got a huge upgrade here in Modern Horizons. The next deck that we're going to talk about is going to be Dredge. So Dredge ended up with only really one card that stands out as a fantastic card for Dredge, which is Shenanigans. 2 mana here for a sorcery, destroy target artifact, and then has Dredge 1 on it. So if we look back at Dredge, what Dredge is just essentially a graveyard deck. You're using cards with the Dredge mechanic to put cards from the top of your library into your graveyard, and then trigger things like Creeping Chill or Narcomoeba. When it's put into your graveyard from your library, you put it onto the battlefield. And then with things like Bloodghast, you can return Prized Amalgam, and then some of your cards that have the Dredge mechanic on them consist of Golgari Thug, Stinkweed Imp, Dark Blast, where's the last one? Life from the Loam is here then as well. And occasionally you'll see a land as well, the Dakmor Salvage. There we go. The Dakmor Salvage sometimes sees play. So this card that I got here is mainly going to be a sideboard card, but having another playable card with the Dredge mechanic on it is obviously fantastic for this Dredge deck. When we look at cards that they play that are here to destroy artifacts, in the sideboard of this list specifically, 4 Nature's Claims, 3 Ancient Grudge, 1 Assassin's Trophy. So these Ancient Grudges most likely are just going to disappear, and you're going to see them replaced with the Shenanigans, because again, has the same sort of thing where you can bring it back due to the dredge mechanic, so you can recast it again. Ancient Grudge is an instant, and I believe Shenanigans is only a sorcery, which is fairly relevant, but having an additional way to bring it back and maybe put a card from the top of your library into your graveyard is going to be fantastic for dredge. Just changes up the sideboard a little bit, helps them get a little bit better in some of their matchups, and replace some sideboard cards that are currently fine. They're okay sideboard cards right now, so this isn't like the hugest improvement, but it is going to be a significant improvement for the deck. Another thing that really stands out for Dredge is that we didn't really get any hate cards for the graveyard to beat Dredge. So when we look at something like Affinity, which is an artifact-based deck, we got several cards in just green alone to help us fight against Affinity. Where is the green cards? If we look at Collector Oofy, 2 mana for a 2/2, activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. Fantastic hate card against Affinity. Oops, sorry about that. We want this one, the Force of Vigor, 4 mana for an instant. If it's not your turn, you may exile a green card from your hand rather than pay the spell's converted mana cost, or rather than pay the spell's mana cost, and then has destroy up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. So again, can hit 2 potential artifacts from the Affinity deck. So we didn't really get any graveyard hate here for these decks to end up beating Dredge. Dredge just kind of, scaled by. Also, potentially, I've seen a couple people talking about Hogak, Arisen, and Necropolis here for Dredge as well, because it has the delve mechanic, so you can just delve a bunch of your cards from your graveyard that you don't need in there to cast it, and you can also cast it from your graveyard, and then it's a giant 8/8 trampler. I've seen a couple people saying that it might see play. It seems a little bit more cute than functional to me, but maybe we end up seeing like a one of Hogak in the deck, or maybe it ends up as a sideboard card again, something like that. But I think the big card here is really the Shenanigans, and then the fact that it managed to avoid the ever important graveyard hate, and so we're stuck with the same graveyard hate that we currently have in the format. Alright, after Dredge, we're going to take a look at Mardu Pyromancer here. Mardu Pyromancer is a 3-color deck, red, white, and black, that focuses on casting a bunch of spells. As you guys can see here, 29 spells in the deck to trigger your young Pyromancers and make your Bedlam Revelers very cheap. And all of these spells in this deck are fantastic. Lingering Souls is great, K-Command is great, Helix, Thoughtseize, Lightning Bolt, all of these cards are just fantastic cards, and so you're a very nice mid-range deck with a focus on playing out spells and then winning via tokens like the Young Pyromancer or the Lingering Souls, or if you're having trouble with the token win plan, you can go ahead and use the Bedlam Revelers to have a giant creature and win that way. The big improvements here, you can already see it here, don't even have to scroll for it, the Seasoned Pyromancer, 3 mana 2/2 Human Shaman. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you discard 2 cards, and then draw 2 cards. For each non-land card discarded this way, you create a 1/1 red elemental creature token, and then for 5 mana and exile Seasoned Pyromancer from your graveyard, you create 2 1/1 red elemental creature tokens. Obviously, this is a callback to Young Pyromancer, which the deck currently already plays, but this ends up being a very good card for that deck. It's just another great card. Deals with the graveyard a little bit, which does have a bit of a theme here. You can see cards like Faithless Looting and the Lingering Souls that do care about having spells in the graveyard or having themselves in the graveyard, and then Bedlam Reveler, which has the reduced cost based on the number of instant sorcery cards in your graveyard. So these cards in particular, with the Seasoned Pyromancer, are very good. You can see at the 3-drop slot right now, really it's just the Lingering Souls, the K commands, then occasionally Blood Moons. I think Blood Moons are going to start seeing less play after Modern Horizons, which is something that we might talk about in the Biggest Losers video that's coming out on Tuesday. But I think that Blood Moon stops seeing quite as much play, so you'll probably see the 2 Blood Moons removed from the main of Mardu Pyromancer. And then another card that Mardu Pyromancer got that's going to be quite strong for Mardu Pyromancer is the... where's it at? There it is, Kaya's Guile. 3 mana instant, choose 2, each opponent sacrifices a creature, exile all cards from each opponent's graveyard. So there is a little bit of graveyard hate, going back to the Dredge comment that I made earlier about 0 graveyard hate. There is a little bit of some, but it is for a very, very specific deck here because you have to play the Kaya's Guile. Third mode on it, create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying, and then finally you gain 4 life. Right now, white and black together in Modern don't really see much play. Esper Control is a little bit of a thing, which will play the Kaya's Guile, most likely. And then Abzan has stopped seeing play. People are just settling more on black-green rock. And then when we talk about Mardu, I think that's the place that Kaya's Guile is most likely going to see play. All of these modes are great. The only thing is, sometimes in Mardu Pyromancer, it's hard to imagine them getting to the 6 mana to do the entwine for each of these modes. But even if you're just up against burn for 3 mana, gain 4 life, each opponent sacks a creature, you're paying 1 extra mana for a Blessed Alliance essentially in there. But you're paying the 1 extra mana for utility purposes, so it means that you can play against Dredge. You'd be able to also gain 4 life and then exile all the cards from their graveyard, because that would be more relevant in that matchup. And so sometimes in Magic you have to pay more mana for utility purposes, which is exactly what you'd be doing with the Kaya's Guile. I think the Entwine is just like the icing on the cake. I don't think it's the real selling point for this card, but I do think it is. I do think it's okay. So I like evaluating something like Kaya's Guile on just 3 mana choose 2 modes, and even there I think it's very strong and reminds me a lot of Kolaghan's Command, which the deck is already playing. 3 copies here, so maybe you could see something like 1 Kolaghan's Command, 2 Kaya's Guile, or 2 Kolaghan's Command, 1 Kaya's Guile, and then because the Blood Moons are most likely going to be leaving, that opens up 2 extra slots as well that the Kaya's Guile could potentially fit in as well. So some very good upgrades here for Mardu Pyromancer to make that deck a bit more stronger and also a bit more consistent, which I very much like when decks are made more consistent. And then the final deck that we have here is Sultai Teaching Reclamation. So this is based around the standard card Wilderness Reclamation. Everyone knows this deck along with Nexus of Fate. It's been doing some things in standard here for a while now, allowing you to have the effect of, at the beginning of your end step, untap all land you control. So this is an effect that goes on the stack. It's a trigger. So if you have, say, 4 mana untapped when this Wilderness Reclamation goes in play, and let's say you have a total of 8 lands, you tap your 4 untapped lands for mana, and then have the Wilderness Reclamation go on the stack, and then you could tap your 8 lands again after the trigger resolves, and then suddenly you're looking at 12 mana when you should have only had 8. And this gets out of hand, or sorry, when you should have only had 4 is what I should be saying. You get 3 times the mana in that scenario that I just named there, but of course the deck is just great. But it does require you to play a lot of instant speed spells. So in this deck right now, aside from the lands and aside from the 4 enchantments, the 3 reclamations, and the search for Azcanta, everything else is an instant or has flash, which means that you can play it with Mystical Teachings, where you can search your library for an instant card or a card with flash, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. It also has flashback, so you can cast it from your graveyard again. But this deck definitely received 2 big inclusions. The first big inclusion is up here in blue. We have Factor Fiction. 4 mana instant, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Again, it is competing for the same slot as Mystical Teachings and Cryptic Command, and you don't want to put too many 4-drops in your deck, because that gets a little bit too clunky then. But maybe you could cut 1 Mystical Teachings, throw in a Factor Fiction, or maybe throw Factor Fiction in the sideboard for the decks that are going to be much more grindy, and the extra card advantage could be very important in those specific matchups. Because when you talk about Mystical Teachings, it is essentially if you don't have the flashback on it and you just have the first half of Mystical Teachings, it's a 1-for-1. There's no card advantage there. It's card neutral. You get to search your library for 1 card, but you're using a card in order to do it. When you talk about Factor Fiction, you could max out at a 5-for-1. Obviously, in competitive Modern, most likely no one is going to give you the 5-0 split on your Factor Fictions, but you could be looking at a 3-for-1 for 4 mana with the Factor Fiction, or a 2-for-1 for 4 mana with the Factor Fiction, which makes it card advantage instead of just card neutral, which I think is the big selling point on Factor Fiction in this deck. And then, of course, it is an instant, which means it works with the whole theme of the deck. The other card that could end up working here could be, I love this inclusion, by the way, Squirrel Nest. 3 mana enchantment aura, enchant land. Enchanted land has tap, create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. So again, when we go back to the trigger on Wilderness Reclamation, you can tap your land, make a 1/1 squirrel, and then your land untaps for the Wilderness Reclamation. If you need to use that mana then later on in their end step, you can go ahead and use it. If not, you just make another squirrel. It works out very, very nicely with these untap effects, and Wilderness Reclamation is playing an untap effect. It also makes the games go significantly faster because you do have some sort of a clock now in the Sultai Reclamation deck. Also, if your opponent's playing something like, Emrakul or something like that, where it's hard to mill them out, normally you have to mill them out by like just casting Blue Sun Zenith for like 1,000,000 or whatever if you're playing against the Emrakul decks. But if you're playing against an Emrakul deck and maybe I don't know, this is like a very, very niche interaction. Let's say there are an Emrakul deck that for some reason they have managed to mill your own Blue Sun Zenith and then Surgical Extraction the Blue Sun Zenith. They're playing some sort of mill Emrakul strategy. I don't know, but let's say it exists. You no longer really have a win condition here. You can take infinite turns with Nexus of Fate and then infinite Snapcaster beats, but even then you only have, say, Pulse of Marasa plus 3 Snapcaster mages. I guess you have some of the lands too. You have like the Creeping Tar Pits, but if it makes it much more reasonable to have an additional creature-based win condition in the deck by making all of these squirrel tokens with the Squirrel Nest. They're also just essentially 2 chump blockers a turn, which can be great against the creature matchups like humans or whatever. If you're trying to find, your sideboard, Consume the Meek, and you need that as your win condition, and you're just trying to buy time until you can find it, then this can buy you a lot of time. Chump blocking 2 creatures a turn is not an insignificant amount of creatures. That's a lot of damage being saved and can add up a lot over time. So with that being said, that's going to be today's video for the first 5 decks from Modern Horizons that I have getting big improvements from the Modern Horizons printings. Again, we do have 5-color Slivers, Devoted Company, and other creature-based combo decks, Dredge, Mardu Pyromancer, and then finally Sultai Reclamation as the final deck. Again, tomorrow's video is going to be another 5 decks that are improving due to Modern Horizons, and then on Tuesday we'll be looking at the 5 biggest losers from the printings of Modern Horizons. If you guys did enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like on it, comment if you guys did enjoy the video, or if you have any opinions towards the thoughts that I put into this video, the different decks that I think are going to be improved. If you think one of the interactions I mentioned is more cute than playable, then go ahead and let me know down below in the comment section. As always, thank you to Cardsphere for sponsoring the video, and I will see you guys here next time for another Magic the Gathering video.